Hello, hey, this is Matt at Passageways. Good afternoon. Good morning to some of you on our friends on the West Coast. Appreciate you taking some time to join us regarding an all-encompassing and important topic that is millennials. I know some of you have been asking for this series and some of the things we've been doing at Passageways, specifically to work with millennials through our employee intranets and boards and engagement. But another part of our business has been recruiting, retaining, and making them successful. So I want to share some of the innovative approaches we found to be successful, as well as some industry best practices, and just to set expectations, hoping to wrap up in about 30 minutes or so, setting the stage for this first webinar, and we'll talk about that in the series as we get rolling here. Okay. So the first thing is do an intro here. Again, my name is Matt Maxwell. I am the Director of Business Development here at Passageways. I am a millennial. I would say after years of fighting that description, I fall at 18 to 35-year-old. Very, very non-traditional in a sense, as you can see from my bio and background. I actually took 3 years off between high school and college because I just did not enjoy the small town school environment, and thought, if college is like this, I want nothing to be a part. So I actually worked 15 jobs in 3 years, holding them all for a year. So I was very, very busy. Never had a full-time job, but I was working 80 hours a week across the different roles I had. So through that experience, I determined I loved working with, and still do, love working with the next generation. At the time, I was a wrestling coach for high school, junior high, and elementary, and really grew a respect of the different stages in development. And as I continued my career, found even from a collegiate level, working with college students, reviewing business plans and setting goals and job placement and things of that nature. Really, really love that. But I found there were some very, very distinct differences about this generation in some of the pieces, because there really are digital natives. Okay, so let's get to some of the content for today and setting the stage. So this is, again, part one of our 4-part webinar series. The first one is going to be on recruiting millennials. Who are they? What do they look like? What are they doing? Pretty self-explanatory. So we're going to focus on that today. And then we're going to build on it for the next webinar, which I know I already have people signed up for. And I'll give you the times and whatnot for next month's webinar. But it is really what millennials expect when it comes to onboarding and orientations and things, specifically to financial industry. That's really a big part of who we serve in our client base. So it's helping our clients be successful as well as some of the consulting we've been doing locally regarding business changes and plans. So really excited to start off today's discussion with who millennials are, what they look like, and where the market is. And some of this may be general content you've seen before. I appreciate some of the help I had from clients in building this deck as well, but wanted to share what is the generational split in the workforce today. And as you can see, the baby boomers, as most industry leaders have said, will hang on to their jobs long term, but are starting to decline. And you can see that start to increase here, the decline that is. While our millennials are rapidly taking over and jumping into the space. Our Generation Xers, the parents of the space, are already set there. So how do we participate with this group? How do we set them up for success when it comes to this major shift? Because think about these two groups. You probably experienced this within your workforce today. You have your baby boomers, right? They grew up with parents who went through the Great Depression. They were raised very differently. You have the Xers who are in the workforce that are, raised obviously by boomers and, have a very different set themselves. And millennials were digital natives completely, very different from those stages. So now we have a workforce in a market, right? Because 50% of our market is millennials now, of the purchasing power. So this is really setting a stage for who they are, and then you can see the silence, who's the generation before, down to 3%. Okay. Now, we all know with our financial institutions, a lot of our senior management, CEOs, executives may fall in the silence. We've got some of those. I know I have some clients who are 80, 90 plus years old who are still running organizations, and then some of our credit unions and other groups who have, more the Xers and boomers in charge. So there's still that healthy mix, but we find every organization is very different, and obviously the market demands that. Okay, so that's where we stand today from a workforce. But how do we set the stage for millennials? Okay, I already mentioned that we're roughly 18 to 35. I'm going to share some of the things about how to reach them. But the big thing is, what are some of those traits that we're looking for? What is a millennial and what do they do? Well, we're half the workforce. We already talked about that. Marry late in life, roughly in the high 20s, even 30s now. So we're going to see a continuation of, the Generation Z and the one behind us continues to have a later start. So what does this look like? Well, they still have a vast majority of the buying power. But the big thing I want to draw attention to here is that, only 30% have been married, so it's vastly still a single group, very young, again, haven't married yet, but a big chunk of the workforce, and as we know, require very different approach to the business environment, flex hours, and we'll talk about some of those things as well, and how do we do that within our businesses. But, they're very, very, very independent. They're enthusiastic, and they love to be heard. I love that statement. It rings so true with many of the young individuals we work with. And thus, they require some very different approaches to these. So I'm going to sit on this slide for a little bit. We're going to talk about each one of these. But so often we talk about millennials having this negative connotation in the sense that, they have attention deficit. They have the squirrel syndrome. Squirrel, there they go. They're on to the next thing. Others, you just seem lazy and lackadaisical, entitled. We've heard that time and time again. But then there's the positives. So with all these traits, you have weaknesses and you have strengths. So let's focus on some of the strengths as well, and open-minded and creative. Okay, those are huge, empowered. But let's start from the beginning. So attention deficit, and maybe to bring this back to real-life examples, and many of you probably have seen this. Think about the last time you downloaded an iPhone app or an Android app, or what type of phone you have, right? If it doesn't work the way you expect, you move on to the next thing. If the app doesn't perform as expected, as soon as you implement it, it's not easy, if it's not something that you can go through and get what you need very quickly, or it doesn't engage you, you move on to the next one. You delete it completely, never to revisit, most likely, unless a friend invites you, right? So it's that pulling back to the collaborative. And so that's why we see Facebook and LinkedIn, Twitter. We're going to talk about some of those in a little bit, the heavy hitters, but then there's others, secondary markets. But it's really a huge ability to be able to empower somebody like that, to be able to have things. And we've taught them this, right? The entitledness. Think about, I love sharing this, but I coach my son, 7-year-old baseball team. He already has 6 trophies for baseball, soccer, and basketball. 6 trophies for just participating. Okay, and so he asked me this year when we started baseball, now starting with pitching machine at 7, and said, Daddy, do I get a trophy? And I said, well, you need to earn your trophy this year. And he looked at me puzzled, and that's what it clicked with me, is that he's got all these other trophies, and really only one of them, his team was undefeated. throughout the rest of the seasons. The rest were truly participation, won half their games, don't technically keep score. But we have gone through to now empower this generation that they get a cookie for every little thing, right? To get participation awards and awards days at schools, all those type things. We're eager to give them some recognition, whether it be justified or not. Just an example is one thing that has changed, and I had to instill in him that you have to earn these ones, right? And you have to work harder. You can't, not practice and things of that nature. So there's some coaching in the process, and we're getting into that when it comes to the onboarding and retention succession planning webinars down the road. I know I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, but I wanted to share, there's bits and pieces to this that we can then take some of these pros, the collaboration, the empowered, desensitized. They cut through the clutter. This is one of the strongest points this generation has. And if I could give you an example of this, is when they go and do research, they Google, they search, they have access to more data than any other generation has had. That's just a fact to it. So how do we help empower a group like this to be able to take on projects, to cut through, get to the true point, position themselves in projects to be successful? There's just some really cool things, but that's one of the pieces they do. So if we are if we're not genuine in our approach to reaching the millennials, then they see right through it, right? So you have to attack them from a very different approach, and we'll share some of those in a little bit. But those are some of the main traits. And the last one, but one of my favorites, call you by your first name. So think about this, and I heard this in a recent discussion here locally with business owners from the Lafayette and West Lafayette community. We were talking about millennials, and they said they can access the CEO. Think about that. They can Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn directly. They have access to anyone. They can even tweet or Facebook the president, and he'll respond. Think about that. The president of the United States will respond. Now, we know that's somebody from their staff, but that is the access that they feel they already have access to, because that we have flattened the world and the communication stream just with technology. So when they come into a workforce, it is first name mentality. Whether you've been CEO and owned the organization for 5 generations, or you're just a collaborative nonprofit, they feel this first name approach, but it's part of their being sincere. That's really a big part, is just an approach for them, having grown up with this technology. Okay, so a lot of pieces. We're going to build on these as we go through today's discussion, as well as the future webinars. But I wanted to hit on these core components, because we can turn and pivot some of these into really strengths. And I can tell you, I've seen teams and individuals really turn when you give them the ability to apply these. Exponential growth even, we've seen here at Passageways, okay? Now, setting the stage, what can you expect? I love this, is the ability of how long have you worked at your organization today? Think about that, right? Many of you have been there several years. Some of you have been there over a decade, others longer. It is really, the commitment has been there long term. This generation is expected to be there less than 3 years. Pretty amazing. That is if you can get 3-4 years, you're doing really well with most of these groups. And that brings up a whole list of questions. How do we retain? Because if we don't empower them and put some of their unique skills to use, rather than the 5-year, 10-year, right, ladder to success, you're going to turn and burn some of your best talent. And we're going to talk about that. But this is really the expectation going into it. Now, obviously, they're half the workforce, so some of you are already experiencing this, right? We've seen groups come in and out, especially some of those who are early adopters to it, who followed X mentality as well. But you're starting to see this more and more and more. And rarely, as you can see, are they expected to stay long term. Okay, so that's a change in expectation from years past, because so often we expect staff, we're going to train them, we're going to build them up, and they're going to be here forever. And that may not be the right expectation, specifically with millennials. Okay. Now, who do they want to work for? That is a huge, huge change, because in the past it was, I wanted to work for Ford or GMC, or, I wanted to work for a .com, in the early 90s and things of that nature. But look at this breakout. Google's always been at the top in my mind, but that's a shift, right? Think about how long they've truly been around, for 10 or 12 years here, 15. Huge shifts. Apple, Facebook, State Department. I thought that was interesting. State Department and Disney really threw it. But think about the work-life environments. They also require that balance. So in their minds, these are the ideal companies to work for. So an expectation, appropriate or not, you fall in the same group, whether they want to work for government, whether they want to work for a tech company such as a Google or an Apple. This is really a huge, huge component, because their expectations are already set. And it's just a matter of, being able to align some of those goals. Now, obviously, as a financial institution, insurance company, hospital, a lot of these things we can't compete with, but we can change our business practice just a little bit to apply some of the best practices from other industries to make sure we are reaching these groups. Okay. So a couple of pieces. I'm going to switch here. There we go. We're going to throw up a survey just real quick before we get into this next one. Conoco, if you could help me with that. I want to throw up the survey on the current spread of your employees. So how many of you, what percentage of your millennials are your workforce? Okay, so make sure that you take a few seconds, fill this in, and I'll just track along. And Conoco, if you could give me just an instant message as to when we have a good chunk of people filling them in and some of the results. This is huge, because every group in industry is a little bit different. Now, I realize geographical plays huge into this, right? Whether we're Midwest, whether we're based out of Texas, or East Coast, obviously. So great to be able to see where you're at today, and help us build some of the content as we move forward. So again, if you get a chance here, fill in the questionnaire as to what percentage of your workforce are millennials, because this is a big shift. Right? Some groups are adopting it very early, others are not. And we'll talk about how we can make those, how we can do that long term with universal tellers and groups and business leaders of the future. It's pretty cool thing you can do, but just interested to see here. I've got 50% or 70% of the votes in. Okay, just a few more seconds here, because I want to get on to the next slide, which is, what are millennials doing? Give you some hard facts. Where are they? Some tips as to, how to retain, or not how to retain, how to recruit, and all the fun pieces here. So just a few seconds left. Punch those in, and Conoco, if you could just shoot me those in the chat with Instant Messenger, that would be great. Okay, last chance, and we'll close that out. Beautiful. Okay, so this is going to help us build content going forward for other webinars, but it's just a good sense to figure out where the group is. So let's get to one of the takeaways for today. Which is, oops, we'll go back to the slide. There we go. Where are they, right? That was a huge part of the webinar and why you're here. And a breakdown as to what percentage, who's using mobile audience, right? Our total mobile app audience, and where people are on Facebook, YouTube, Pandora. Interesting, right? So a good chunk are right there. And it looks like even, wow, 40% of your staff fall in that 30 to 50 range. So you're experiencing some of these things. So it's the you're seeing how to be able to find these individuals. But this is a great way to start. Some of you even found us today through Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. I've even seen some great posts on Pinterest. But this is where those horses are at the watering hole, for lack of a better reference, right? So you want to go where your target audience is. And then you can hit them with some very unique messages, like fun places to work, top places to work in Indiana. That's always been a great one for some of our clients. I see that specifically from like Purdue Federal Credit Union and some of our clients just posting job posts and new accounts, but they're following the images and some of those type of things from like Instagram, and the branding. Not really complicated. It's just a little bit of text on an image. It's very easy. But traditional marketing of a careers page with, the ability to have just a few people, go to our website and check it out and look at it. They don't understand that. Creating a resume and submitting that through it. A lot of those pieces we have to help with. And I've even seen groups such as use tools such as IntelliHire to be able to screen candidates without even having to, see a resume. That's pretty powerful, because how many of you, think about this, how many of you have loaded your resume, or you've seen one that you're like, oh my gosh, they were a such and such technician, but they worked fast food. We have these glamorous names. So it's hard to put candidates side by side without having some of those questionnaires. So the markets are changing as well, how we look at them. I've seen some great uses of Pandora even. Locally, I get ads within my mobile app. I use all of these apps, almost all of them even. No, all of them. Yeah, I use all of these apps to be able to go through. And myself, I use them with friends, family, individuals, and educate even my parents and grandparents on how to use them. There's becoming a lot more adoption. But this is the statistics, Facebook and some of those great resources. If you'd like some of those examples and to chat with a client about what they've done specifically, some of those ads, what they look like, that's a whole nother topic, and trying to get, those and really based on where you're at. So the big thing to take away here is that the brands are shrinking in importance. We're relying really, really heavily on the social component, meaning my peers. I rely on what my peers say. I'm really looking, if I need something, I post it. I post on Facebook or I post it on LinkedIn, depending on the need. And I get responses instantly. I can Google, that's great, but I want from my peers. And same thing. So more often than not, it's getting one or two. And as we saw a good breakdown here, a good chunk of you said you're in that 20 to 30, 40 even range of millennials as staff. It's huge. So as we continue to grow, now it's attracting like-minded staff. Obviously, we're going to have turnover. I was chatting with Bert Fisher from our community credit union. I don't know if he was able to join today, but he's chatting with me at GAC about how they expect 10% turnover. That's just baked into their strategic plan. And he goes, in 10 years, Matt, I'm going to have 100% turnover of staff. And that dawned on me. Oh my gosh. You're always hiring, you're always looking, and that is really playing a role in our training staff, our recruiting staff, both internal, external facing. You have to put a lot of work. One, in getting their attention, right? Because they're looking at the next shiny squirrel, so you have to put a shiny object in front of them. Give them the right impression to set them up for success, because as part of this setting expectations and needing empowered, those are the pieces you lead with those messages. Don't recreate the wheel. Appeal to the terms that they're looking for. Great places to work, fun environment. That's what they're after. Work-life balance. Rarely do we have teams who are looking for an 80-plus hour job, right? They think they're going to come in at 9:30 with our Starbucks. I'm going to be ready to work 9:30, about 3 o'clock. I'm going to take a break. Those are some of the expectations because that's what they do at Google. So there's bits and pieces, right? Now, obviously, this doesn't apply across the board, for every industry, but you can take bits and pieces of this and apply it to your social presence, because this is where majority of our end users and our millennials are specifically out getting their content. And if you can get them to share it and ask questions and things of that nature and get them engaged, then we can start to get that groundswell and really get people engaged with your brand and things. Okay. Now, those of you that are standing against, how we spend our days and what we do, I wanted to give you a breakdown, because social, yeah, that's great. But there's a lot of other things we can do throughout the day. Okay. So I want to give you a breakdown of the, uses of the day. So if we're spending 18 hours a day on media use, think about that, 18 hours a day. Pretty crazy, right? The shift here. So some statistics for you, whether it's listening to the radio, to work, while we're in the shower, while we're getting ready, guilty, hand raised right here. I've got Pandora or Mike and Mike Valerian every morning. And going through. My wife has convinced me to build a separate shower just for me to get ready, so she doesn't have to listen to Mike and Mike. It's that whole component of shift. On top of, do we pay for ads on Pandora? You can try those tests and pilots. How many of them are watching TV, playing video games, shifting, time shifted TV, switching between things, going to the movies and all those. So you can see those here. But the key is there's not a golden bullet. But if you see that we spend the most time browsing the internet and on social networks, watching TV online, that's a big shift, right? It's a big shift in past. Vast majority of my colleagues and friends they pay for the HBO online. They pay for Netflix, and they're trying to find the most efficient way to do it. I had the conversation with some of our staff here at Passageways, even our developers, and what they do is they will shop. They'll go to a store, they'll find Legos or something they're interested in, and they'll price it right there. They'll pull it up on their phone. They'll find it on Amazon. They'll find it on Newegg. They'll find it on eBay. They'll find it somewhere else for cheaper, even $10. Order it from China, and they will. They'll save that money. They'll walk out of the store. They'll order it online. Done. That's a huge shift from years past. So there's a lot of things in buying habits from them. Well, buying habits also impact, job habits, because we are looking for the most efficient way, the best return and things of that nature. So a couple places to hit, you can hit them online, you can see what they're doing, but the key is to know where they're at. Notice how many of them are reading print magazines and newspapers. Think about 20 years ago, 30 years ago, complete shift, right? So us as an organization have to shift with them, and that is a fundamental change for staff. Okay. So there's a lot we've talked about. Okay. I want to go back to the traits, and let's recap some of these components as we're kind of winding down today. Who are millennials? How to get their attention? Well, you have to appeal to their traits. Okay. They're collaborative. They're open-minded. These are the messages, the themes you lead with, your takeaways. Because these are the terms they understand. This speaks to a millennial, such as myself. You can tell me I'm going to be collaborative and I'm going to be put to work and given some projects with my name and buying here in the game right away. You have my attention, as opposed to, you're going to work for somebody else and someday you may get a bid to be able to come into junior management, another 5 years into middle management. Not as appealing, right? You have to set expectations appropriately, of course, but we have to be able to get their attention sooner in order. And I'll talk about the onboarding process in our next webinar. Some of the other components were just collaboration. That is a huge piece. They are really, I should say, we are focused on giving back to the community, philanthropy, huge, right? Most of this generation would rather go to study abroad or go on a mission trip or initiative or humanitarian relief, those type projects appeal to this generation. That is the big key. So those are the type of things we can do as a credit union, as a bank, as a hospital, and other groups here on the webinar. It looks like we've got a pretty good split. Those are a lot of the pieces we wanted to cover today. Okay, so what I'd like to do is, if there are any questions as well, and I'll make sure, Kaneko, if we get any questions, make sure those get punched into the chat, because we have quite a number of attendees today. So if you do have a question, please punch those into the chat. And I'm going to start to wrap up with setting expectations for our next webinar here, which will be covering the components. So if you want, punch in a question to the chat. I'll be around here for a little bit to make sure that we're covering those. You can also reach me directly. Again, my name is Maxwell, and you can reach me at Passageways, okay? And we'll send you out a recording of this webinar, as well as we can shoot you out the slides. But I know a lot of people are excited for this part 2, which is onboarding, what millennials expect. I'll talk about technologies, how we can get them engaged right off the bat, whether it's through portal technology, community engagement. There's a lot of things you can do for staff specifically. And those of you that can't wait and need to have would like to have a one-on-one conversation, perhaps you need some help specifically with a campaign or thoughts. One of the things we did here at Passageways is we got really involved with Purdue University and Ivy Tech, our local community college. So we are working with the sophomores, juniors, and seniors in the school at Cranor, as well as some of the others. I go often, even as a millennial, and judge business plans. I do consulting with them free of charge, but I'm just giving them something to start so they can be able to take advantage, set themselves up for success, because they want to do a lot. This generation is going to start a lot of businesses. We're going to talk about that, in the retaining and succession planning, because they have ambitions to do some of those things. They may feel entitled at the moment, but we have to change their direction, and we'll talk about that a lot in the next one. But the ability. So a couple things. I don't see any big questions in the queue. The only one here is, which social media do you prefer to reach out on? We do a lot with Facebook and LinkedIn. LinkedIn was very good to us this year in recruiting. We would post the job. I pulled some really snappy job descriptions from groups. I borrowed, repurposed, as you were, job postings from groups on the East Coast and some really high growth tech startups, which is what we are here at Passageways, just Midwest company. Borrowed those, repurposed those. I had the best return of applications we've ever had, and then used tools like IntelliHire and groups to screen and go through those. Okay, good question there. So just setting expectations again. Join us on May 10th. We're going to go through right before our client conference and talk about onboarding and what's to be expected of millennials. And with that, we will wrap up today's webinar. Again, any questions can be sent to mmaxwell@passageways.com, or you can check us out at passageways.com. Shoot us, contact us, and I'd be glad to hop on a call with you directly. But with that, I want to thank you for your time. And again, join us May 10th, 2 o'clock for what millennials expect, okay, onboarding them and all. All right, thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.